The morning Lydia Ashford signed her name on a marriage contract, it was raining in Vancouver. Not the kind of dramatic downpour that feels like a warning, just a gray, relentless drizzle that made everything look washed out. She remembers thinking that was probably fitting. She had met Marcus Holt exactly 4 times before the wedding. Once at a charity dinner her father had dragged her to, once at a meeting that lasted 11 minutes in a glass-walled boardroom downtown, and twice more at gatherings so formal that conversation felt like a performance. He was exactly what everyone said he was: tall, composed, the kind of man who made a room recalibrate the moment he walked in. He shook her father's hand with the specific confidence of someone who had never once doubted a decision in his life. He smiled at her twice. Both times it looked like something he had practiced. She was 27. He was 38. He was the CEO of Holt Group, one of the most aggressively successful real estate development firms in Western Canada. And the reason her father's struggling architecture practice was about to get a lifeline it desperately needed. She understood the arrangement. She had been raised to understand arrangements. What she had not been prepared for was the silence. Not awkward silence, the kind that comes with nerves or unfamiliarity. This was deliberate silence. The silence of a man who had decided, for reasons he shared with no one, that his new wife existed somewhere on the periphery of his life, like a piece of furniture he had acquired for a specific room and then never quite found a use for. They lived in the same house. A beautiful, cold house in West Vancouver with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the inlet, and Marcus Holt moved through it like she wasn't there. He left before 7 every morning. He returned after 9 most nights. On weekends, he sometimes sat in his study with the door open, which Lydia eventually understood was not an invitation but simply a habit. He ate the meals she initially prepared without comment, not compliment, not complaint. He responded to questions with answers that were accurate and completely empty of anything personal. He never once asked her about her day, her work, her thoughts on anything at all. She had her own work. That mattered. She had spent the years before the marriage building a small but genuinely good interior design practice. Residential projects, mostly. A few commercial spaces. A growing list of clients who came back to her because she actually listened to what they needed. She kept working after the wedding. She wasn't sure what she would have done if she hadn't. Months passed. She stopped trying to time dinner to when he might be home. She stopped leaving the light on in the front hallway for him. She found a rhythm of her own. Work during the day, evenings with books or video calls with her friend Simone, who lived in Toronto now and had a gift for making Lydia laugh even when she didn't feel like it. She told Simone partial truths. She said the marriage was quiet. She said Marcus was very busy. She said she was fine in a way that she mostly believed. A year in, she had a realization so quiet she almost missed it. She had stopped wondering when things would get better. She had simply organized her life around their separateness, the way you learn to navigate a room with an odd-shaped piece of furniture that can't be moved. This was her life. She had signed her name on it. 2 years in, Marcus hired a new head of European partnerships. His name was Callum Reid. Scottish-born, based out of London, relocating to Vancouver for the role. He needed a place to stay while his apartment was being set up, and Marcus, with characteristic efficiency, suggested the guest suite at the house for a few weeks. He mentioned this to Lydia on a Tuesday evening with about the same energy he might use to mention that someone was coming to surface the HVAC system. Callum Reid arrived on a Thursday evening with 2 suitcases, and the easiest laugh Lydia had heard in 2 years. He was not what she expected. She had expected someone like Marcus. Precise, contained, all sharp edges. Callum was warm in the way that catches you off guard when you've gone a long time without warmth. He asked questions and then actually listened to the answers. He noticed the Lauren Harris print in the hallway and said something specific and genuinely curious about it. He offered to help with dinner and then did, badly, and apologized cheerfully for the mess. Within 3 days, he and Lydia had fallen into a comfortable friendship that felt, to her, like remembering a language she hadn't spoken in a long time. They talked about design. He had opinions, interesting ones. They talked about cities and the way certain places feel alive in ways others don't. He asked her about her work and listened with the kind of attention that makes you hear yourself differently. He was not flirtatious. He was simply kind, genuinely, straightforwardly kind, in the manner of someone who has never found it necessary to perform. Marcus noticed. She couldn't have said exactly when it started, but she felt it. A shift in the atmosphere of the house, subtle and charged, like pressure changing before a storm. Marcus began coming home earlier. Not dramatically. Not racing through the door. But where before it was never before 9, it was now sometimes 8, sometimes 7:30. He would find them in the kitchen and stand in the doorway for a moment before coming in. He began sitting in the living room after dinner instead of retreating to his study. He asked questions, small ones, innocuous sounding, about what they had done that day. He had never asked before about anything. Lydia noticed all of this and told herself it meant nothing. She was careful, very careful, not to let herself read anything into it, because she had spent 2 years learning to manage her own expectations, and she was not about to dismantle that protection over something as unreliable as a man changing his schedule. But the looks were harder to dismiss. She would glance up from whatever she was doing and find Marcus watching her. Not in a way she could confront, not staring, nothing so obvious, but watching, the way you watch something you're trying to understand. She caught it 3 times in 1 week, and each time he looked away without expression, as though it hadn't happened. There was a morning, maybe 3 weeks after Callum arrived, when Lydia and Callum were in the kitchen before Marcus had left for work. Callum was telling her something absurd about a conference he'd attended in Edinburgh, doing voices, and she laughed. A real laugh, the kind that surprises you. And then she looked up and Marcus was standing in the doorway in his coat, keys in his hand, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen there before. It was there and gone in seconds, but she had seen it. She didn't know what to do with it. She put it away. The event was called the Pacific Design and Architecture Gala, an annual Vancouver affair, a big room full of money and ambition, and people who wanted to be seen making conversation with other people who wanted to be seen. Lydia attended every year for professional reasons. This year Marcus told her, over breakfast on a Thursday, that he would be attending as well. His firm was being recognized for a major mixed-use development project on the North Shore. "Will you come with me?" he asked. The question was so unexpected that she looked up from her coffee. He was looking at the table, not at her. The way he'd asked it, not commanding, not suggesting, but actually asking, with something in his voice she couldn't name, made her chest tighten for a reason she wasn't sure she wanted to examine. "All right," she said. She went back to her coffee. He went back to his. She wore a dress she'd had for a year and never found occasion for. Deep burgundy, understated, the kind of thing that doesn't try too hard. She took care with her hair. She told herself it was because this was a professional event, because she would see colleagues and clients and people who mattered to her work. She told herself that twice. Marcus was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she came down. He looked up and went very still for just a moment, the way a person stops when something catches them off guard. And then he said, "You look beautiful," and it was so simple and so unlike anything he had ever said before that she almost didn't know what to do with it. She said thank you. She picked up her coat. They left. The gala was everything it always was. The soft roar of 100 conversations happening at once. Waitstaff moving through the crowd with practiced invisibility. The particular smell of expensive catering and good wine and ambition. Lydia moved through it with the ease of someone who had done this many times. Stopping to talk with clients, an architect she'd collaborated with on a project in Yaletown, a journalist who covered design and always had smart things to say. Marcus stayed close, not hovering, he was too controlled for that, but present, in a way he had never been at the 2 or 3 events they had attended together in the previous 2 years. He introduced her. He said, "My wife, Lydia," in a way that didn't sound like a contractual disclosure but like something he actually meant. She noticed. She kept moving. It was near the end of the evening when things shifted. She had stepped away to speak with a group of colleagues, a conversation about a project she was being considered for, something significant, a mixed-use cultural space on Granville Island. She was in the middle of explaining her design philosophy when she became aware of someone entering the group's orbit. A man she knew slightly, a developer named Warren, older. The kind of person who uses social gatherings to make it subtly clear that he is aware of everyone's circumstances. He smiled at her and made a comment, dressed as a compliment, about how impressive it was that she'd managed to build her practice with everything else she had on her plate. His eyes moved briefly in the direction of Marcus across the room. The implication landed perfectly clearly. She was here because of her husband. Her work was a nice hobby for a well-kept woman. She felt something go quiet inside her. The kind of quiet before you make a decision. Actually, she said, and her voice was steady, the practice predates the marriage. I built it independently. And the Granville Island project, if I take it, will be the largest commission I've had, which I'd say has more to do with the work than with anything else. She said it pleasantly, without heat, looking Warren directly in the eye. Silence in the small group. Then someone laughed. The journalist, actually, who looked delighted, and the conversation moved on. What Lydia didn't realize until a few moments later was that Marcus had been close enough to hear it. She didn't see him until she turned and found him just off her shoulder, close, looking at her with an expression that was unguarded in a way she had never once seen on his face. They didn't speak about it immediately. They moved through the rest of the evening. On the drive home, Marcus driving, the city lights sliding past the windows, neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Marcus said, "I owe you an apology." She turned to look at him. He kept his eyes on the road. "More than one," he said. "But I don't know where to start, so I'll start with that." She waited. "When I agreed to this marriage," he said, slowly, like someone choosing each word with real care, "I told myself it was reasonable, practical, a good decision for both sides. I didn't think about what it meant to you." A pause. "I didn't let myself think about what it meant to you. I thought the arrangement was the whole of it, and that if I just stayed separate, kept things clean, it would be fair to you. Not kind. I know it wasn't kind. But at least clear. And then," she said quietly, "and then Callum came, and I watched you. I watched how you talked to him, how you were with him. Not because anything was happening. I knew nothing was happening. But I watched you laugh, and I realized I had never once made you laugh. Not once in 2 years." He exhaled. "And I understood for the first time that the arrangement I thought was fair was actually just absence. I gave you nothing and told myself I was being clean about it." Lydia was quiet for a moment. "I tried," she said. "Early on, I tried to. I made dinner, I left space for conversation. I'm not entirely without fault here. I could have said something more directly. I could have told you what I needed." She looked at her hands. "But I'd been so trained to believe that what I needed wasn't really part of this agreement. So I stopped asking." He nodded slowly. "I know. What I need to know," she said, and her voice was careful now, deliberate, "is whether tonight was about Callum. Whether you're saying this because you got jealous and now you want to reclaim something, because if that's what this is, then I'd rather we have an honest conversation about what comes next. I'm not interested in being something you decide you want because someone else paid attention to me." The car was quiet. "No," he said. And then, after a long moment, "It started with Callum. I won't lie to you about that. You'd see through it and it would make everything worse. It started there. But what it opened up wasn't jealousy. It was, I looked at you and I realized I don't actually know you. I've lived with you for 2 years and I have made no attempt to know you, and I don't think that's something I can live with anymore." She looked at him for a long moment. "That's a beginning," she said. "Not an ending, a beginning." He nodded once. "I know. I'll take a beginning. It wasn't fast after that. It wasn't a door swinging open into sudden warmth. It was more like a window, cracked first, then opened wider, one increment at a time." He asked her about her work. A real question, not a polite one. And she answered, and he listened, and then he asked a follow-up question that showed he had actually processed what she said. She told him about the Granville Island project. He leaned forward over the kitchen table and asked about the design constraints, the cultural space requirements, what she found hardest about the site. He had opinions. Good ones, sometimes. She pushed back on 2 of them, and he didn't flinch. He reconsidered, and once told her she was right. He stopped traveling for work without telling her his schedule. He started sending her a message when he'd be late. Not checking in, not asking for anything, just the information, offered as a kind of respect. She started replying. Small things at first, then longer. Then sometimes what started as a text became a phone call that lasted an hour. And she'd be standing at her kitchen counter, with her coffee going cold, and realize she'd been smiling the entire time. She told Simone one night, not the careful partial truth version but the real version. Simone was quiet for a moment and then said, "Lydia, do you actually like him now?" And Lydia said, "I think I might," in the voice of someone who is surprised by this and also, maybe for the first time, okay with being surprised. Callum moved into his apartment in November. He had dinner with them once before he left. A warm, easy evening. The three of them at the dining table that had barely been used in 2 years. Good wine, a lot of laughter. Before he left, he shook Marcus's hand and then hugged Lydia and said quietly, close to her ear, "He's better when you're in the room, just so you know." She laughed and shook her head, but she held on to it. It was January, a clear, cold Friday evening, the mountains sharp against the sky over the inlet, when Marcus came home at 6:30 carrying flowers. Not a bouquet from a gas station, not something ordered through an assistant. He had stopped somewhere himself. She could tell from the way they were wrapped, a little imperfect, a florist's paper slightly damp from the cold, that he had stood there and chosen them himself. They were winter ranunculus. Her favorite, though she had mentioned it only once, months earlier, in passing. She took them from him and didn't say anything for a moment. "I remember you said," he started. "I know," she said. She put them in a tall glass and set them on the kitchen counter and then stood looking at them for a moment before she turned back to him. "Dinner?" she said. "Dinner," he said. They cooked together. Badly, mostly. Arguing lightly about whether the pasta water needed more salt. It did. Laughing about something he'd witnessed on a call that afternoon. And somewhere in the middle of it, somewhere between the steam from the pot and the cold coming off the windows, and the ease of standing close to him, without it meaning nothing, she understood that she had stopped managing her expectations. She was no longer protecting herself against the possibility of wanting more. She was just here, with him, in the kitchen, on a Friday, and it was enough to be exactly that. Spring came slow to Vancouver that year. By March, things between them had settled into something that felt, for the first time, genuinely like a life rather than an arrangement. She started a project notebook on the kitchen counter, sketches and reference images and notes to herself. And Marcus had taken to pausing over it in the mornings, asking what something was, and she'd explain it. And sometimes he'd sit down and she'd be late leaving because the conversation had gone somewhere she hadn't expected. She got the Granville Island commission. She called him first, before Simone, before her father, before anyone. She hadn't planned to. It just happened. And the sound of his voice when he said, "I knew you would," was something she turned over in her mind for a long time afterward. There was a morning in April, early, the light still low and golden over the inlet, when she woke up before him and lay there for a moment listening to the rain on the windows. He was beside her, one arm over her, and she looked at the ceiling and felt something she didn't immediately have a name for. Not happiness exactly, or not only happiness, but something more durable than that. Something that had been earned slowly, over time, in 100 small moments neither of them had planned. Later that morning, over coffee, he said, "I've been thinking about what you said at the gala, about building the practice independently." She looked up. "You've never asked me to be part of it," he said. "The work. I know that I haven't earned a right to be part of it yet, but I'd like to be, someday, if you'd let me." She considered this. "Ask me in a year," she said. He smiled. A real one, the kind she had only started to see in the last few months. "Okay, and Marcus." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "Don't refer to it as letting you. It's not a favor. It's a partnership. If you want that, you ask like it's a partnership." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Ask me in a year," he said again, differently this time. "Better," she said. The ranunculus on the kitchen counter had long since been replaced, twice, 3 times. And every time she came home to new ones, it was never accompanied by fanfare. Just there, in the same tall glass, the way some things become simply part of the language of a life together. She stopped noticing them the way you stop noticing good things that have become reliable. She had learned carefully what it meant when something became reliable. And late that spring, on a Tuesday evening when the city was finally warm and the windows were open, and the smell of cedar and salt came in off the water, Marcus looked up from something he was reading and said, quietly, as though the thought had simply arrived, "I'm glad you stayed." She didn't look up from her sketchbook. "I'm glad you noticed," she said.